I walked into the gala with a hollow stomach, watching my husband hold another woman's waist under the flashbulbs. He kissed her like a coronation while his mother introduced me as a charity case. I did not scream. I just stepped back and dialed my mother. 15 minutes later, the first notification chimed on a shareholder's phone, and his empire began to fall. My name is Evelyn Harper, and the only thing keeping me upright in those 4-inch heels was the sheer, cold architecture of my rage. I had spent the last 10 minutes in the guest bathroom retching into a porcelain sink, emptying my stomach of nerves and stress. But as I walked into the ballroom of the Grand Hotel, my face was a mask of perfect, porcelain calm. This was the quarterly success party for Roe and Red, a night meant to celebrate record profits and strategic victories. But the real show was happening in the center of the room. Gavin Roe, my husband of 3 years and the CEO of this empire, was not looking for me. He was standing directly under the crystal chandelier, his hand resting comfortably, possessively, on the waist of Sloane Kincaid. She was wearing a silver dress that looked less like fabric and more like liquid mercury poured over her skin. They were laughing. It was a loud, boisterous sound that echoed off the high ceilings, announcing to everyone in the room that they were the main event. I tightened my grip on my clutch. Diane Rowe, my mother-in-law and the matriarch who still pulled every string from the shadows, intercepted me before I could take another step. She held a flute of champagne, her smile tight and predatory. She raised her glass slightly, her voice pitched just loud enough for the circle of board members nearby to hear. "Oh, here she is," Diane said, her tone dripping with faux sweetness. "Everyone, this is Evelyn." The girl we were so lucky to pull out of that quaint little ordinary life of hers. I felt the weight of their eyes. It was a physical pressure. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It is a lovely evening. Diane," I said, my voice steady. The event videographer swept past us, the red light of the camera blinking. I heard the whispers ripple through the crowd like a draft of cold air. Is she really the wife someone murmured behind a fan? I thought the one in silver was the partner. Another voice whispered back. I did not flinch. I watched as Gavin turned to the crowd, his face flushed with the arrogance of a man who believes he is untouchable. He gestured for silence, and the room obeyed. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a long velvet box. My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized that box. Inside was the platinum pendant with the Roe and Red logo encrusted with sapphires. It was the commemorative gift for the lead strategist of the quarter. It was the gift prepared for me, to the person who truly understands the vision of this company, Gavin announced, his eyes locked on Sloane, to my muse. He opened the box and fastened the necklace around Sloane's neck. The crowd applauded politely, but the confusion in the room was palpable. Sloane beamed, touching the diamonds that were bought with the profits from my strategies. Diane stepped up to the microphone next, her gaze slicing through the crowd until it landed squarely on me. Success, Diane purred into the mic, requires everyone to know their proper place. Some are born to lead and shine in the light, and others, well, others are born to support silently from the shadows. That is the true virtue of a woman. It was a public execution of my character. She was telling the world I was nothing more than an accessory, and a discarded one at that. I did not cry. I did not storm the stage. I looked down at the delicate analog watch on my left wrist. 7:45. The timing was immaculate. On the stage, Gavin leaned down. He did not care about the investors, the partners, or his wife standing 20 feet away. He kissed Sloane. It was deep, lingering, and performative. The flashbulbs erupted like lightning. That was the signal. I took one step back, retreating into the shadows Diane claimed I belonged in. I pulled my phone from my clutch. My fingers did not tremble as I unlocked the screen and dialed the number I had saved for this exact nightmare. The line clicked open on the first ring. "Mom," I said, switching to English instantly, my voice barely a whisper but cutting through the noise of the applause. "I need you to do the thing you swore you would never do again." Before I was the woman standing in the shadows of a ballroom, clutching a phone like a detonator. I was a force of nature. 2 years ago, nobody looked at me and saw a trophy wife. They saw Evelyn Harper, the senior strategist at Larkspur Ridge Consulting. In the corporate world, I was known as the person you called when you wanted to find a trapdoor in a room with no windows. I could read a 60-page merger agreement and smell a bad deal the way a sailor smells a storm before the sky even turns gray. I did not come from money. I grew up in Briar Hollow, a river town where the fog rolled in thick and the opportunities were thin. We did not have galas or trust funds. But Briar Hollow taught me the only law that matters. My mother, Mara, drilled it into me while she balanced ledgers at the kitchen table. She would tap the paper with her pen and say, "Evelyn, if you do not record the truth yourself, someone else will write it for you, and they will never write you as the hero." I met Gavin during a hostile negotiation in Chicago. I was representing the opposing firm. His team had buried a penalty clause in the appendix, a nasty little paragraph that would have cost my client $4 million over 5 years. I found it in 10 minutes. When I slid the red-lined contract across the mahogany table, Gavin didn't look angry. He looked mesmerized. He didn't fall for my face or my dress. He fell for the way I dissected his strategy without blinking. Our courtship wasn't filled with roses and poetry. It was fueled by ambition. We spent nights in 24-hour diners, drinking terrible coffee and sketching out business models on paper napkins. Gavin told me he was suffocating under the weight of his family's archaic way of doing business. "My family built an empire on handshakes and favors," he told me one night, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "It's messy. I want to build something cleaner, something based on merit, like what you do." When he proposed, we were alone in his penthouse. There was no audience, no cameras. He held my hands so tight it almost hurt. "In this house," he promised me, his voice cracking with emotion, "you will never be made small." "You are my partner, Evelyn. We are equal." I believed him. I believed him because he said it in the dark, where lies are harder to tell. Then came Diane. Diane Rowe did not walk. She glided, like a shark in silk. She was the definition of matriarchal power, polished to a lethal shine. The first time I had dinner at the Rowe estate, the air in the dining room was so cold I could feel it in my bones. She waited until the soup course was cleared before she began her appraisal. "So, Evelyn," she said, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin, her eyes scanning me like I was a piece of furniture she wasn't sure she wanted to buy. "Gavin tells me you are quite the career woman. But tell me about your people. Do your parents have any standing in our circles?" The question hung in the air, heavy and insulting. She wasn't asking about their character. She was asking about their net worth. "My mother is a bookkeeper," I answered, keeping my spine steel straight. "She taught me the value of precision and honesty." Diane smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give to a child who has just said something amusingly stupid. "How quaint," she murmured, lifting her wine glass. "It is always refreshing to meet someone so grounded. It must be nice to have such simple aspirations." Her tone suggested that my value was adorable but ultimately negligible. She was covering my worth in dust right in front of me. I married Gavin anyway. I thought our love was a modern fortress that could withstand her old-world snobbery. I thought we were a team. I didn't realize that the whispers at that dinner table were not just rude comments. They were the blueprints for a cage they were already building around me. The erasure of my name did not happen all at once. It happened in slow, deliberate strokes, like a painter covering a vibrant canvas with layers of gray primer. It started at the Rowe and Red headquarters. I had spent 3 months building the framework for the merger with the logistics giant in Seattle. It was my data, my risk analysis, and my sleepless nights that had paved the road for the deal. But when the final presentation slides flickered onto the screen in the boardroom, the author line did not say Evelyn Harper. It simply read Strategic Team Effort. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. Later, in the safety of our bedroom, I asked Gavin why my name had been scrubbed from my own work. He was unbuttoning his shirt, looking at me in the mirror with a pitying expression that made my skin crawl. Evelyn, honey, you are being sensitive, he said, tossing his shirt onto the chair. Mom just thought it looked better for company unity. She is only trying to protect you. You know how the board gets when they see too many individual names? She does not want you to be a target. A target for credit, I asked, my voice tight. For criticism, he corrected, turning to kiss my forehead as if I were a child who had scraped a knee. Just let it go. We are a team. Remember. Then came the gifts. Diane started sending packages to the house. They were never things I liked. They were uniforms. Heavy silk scarves, pearl brooches that belonged on a woman 40 years older than me, and beige dress suits that erased my figure. Each gift came with a handwritten note on heavy cardstock. Wear this to the luncheon tomorrow. One note read, learn to look the part. Do not make Gavin embarrassed by looking like a working girl. I was being edited. My work was being absorbed, and my image was being softened until I was nothing more than a blurred background figure. The professional isolation escalated quickly. I showed up for the crucial Tuesday morning strategy sync, the one where we decided the budget for the next fiscal year, only to find the conference room dark and empty. I checked my phone. The calendar invite had been deleted. When I found Gavin in his office later, he was already drinking scotch, even though it was only 2 p.m. Oh, that, he said, waving his hand dismissively. We moved it to 8 a.m. I didn't copy you because, well, I wanted you to rest. You looked so tired lately. I told Mom, and she agreed. We need you fresh for the lighter tasks. Lighter tasks, I repeated. I walked out and cornered Mark, a junior analyst who I had trained myself. He looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes. Mark, why wasn't I on the email chain? I asked. I am sorry. Evelyn, he whispered, glancing at the security camera in the hallway. Mrs. Rowe told us not to bother you with the heavy numbers anymore. She said you get stressed easily. She told the team you are fragile. Fragile. That was the word they were planting in the soil of my reputation. While I was being painted as the delicate flower who needed naps, Gavin began bringing Sloane Kincaid to every networking event. She was introduced not as his mistress, but as the new brand consultant. She was sharp, aggressive, and she laughed too loudly at his jokes. Diane made sure the narrative took root. At a charity dinner, I heard her talking to a major investor while I stood just 5 feet away, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres like a waitress. Gavin needs strong support right now, Diane said, her voice carrying perfectly. Evelyn is sweet, of course, but she is better suited for domestic management. She just doesn't have the stomach for power. I did not throw the tray. I did not interrupt. I walked calmly to my car, drove home, and went into my private study. I opened my laptop and created a new encrypted folder on a server that Rowe and Red's IT department didn't know existed. I named it simply The Ledger. I started forwarding every email where my name was removed. I downloaded the metadata from the file drafts, proving I was the original author. I recorded the times of the meetings I was excluded from. I logged every time Gavin claimed a business dinner with his consultant that lasted until 3 a.m. I realized then that I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting a war against a systematic campaign to delete my professional existence. They thought they were burying me. But they forgot one crucial thing about working with a strategist. We know that paper trails are the only weapon that never misses. My mother, Mara Harper, lived in a small, clapboard house that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. She drove a sedan that was over 10 years old and bought her clothes from the clearance racks at the local department store. For my entire life, she had been a ghost when it came to her past. She never spoke of my father, and she never spoke of where she had learned to read a balance sheet better than a Wall Street auditor. Whenever I tried to pry, she would just smooth her apron and give me the same advice she had given me since kindergarten. "Evelyn," she would say, her eyes sharp and unblinking, "do not win by making noise. Win by timing." I always assumed she was just a freelance bookkeeper who was unusually talented. She did taxes for the local bakery and the mechanic down the street, and she could spot a missing cent in a grocery bill from 20 feet away. But looking back, I should have realized that her skills were too sharp for small-town commerce. She didn't just add numbers. She interrogated them. When I started bringing my frustrations home, telling her how Gavin was erasing my name from the slides, how Diane was treating me like an incompetent child, Mom did not get angry. She did not cry or tell me to leave him. Instead, she sat very still at her kitchen table, her hands clasped on top of a plastic placemat. "Who signed the final authorization on the merger?" she asked one afternoon, her voice devoid of emotion. "Who holds the veto power on the board?" "And Evelyn, who holds the debt?" I stared at her, confused by her coldness. "Mom, why does the debt matter? They are stealing my work. They are humiliating me. Ethics are for fairy tales," she replied, pouring me a cup of tea with a steady hand. "Debt is leverage. You do not confront a woman like Diane directly. She lives on her image. If you attack her face, she wins because she has better makeup. You have to attack the ground she stands on." It was the most ruthless thing I had ever heard her say. A few weeks later, I was helping her clear out the attic to fix a leak in the roof. I knocked over a stack of old files, and a heavy leather-bound folder slid across the dusty floor. It wasn't a tax return. It was an old portfolio with a seal I didn't recognize. Inside the front cover, there was an embossed stamp in gold ink, faded but legible Quinridge Ledger and Trust. I had never heard the name. It sounded like old money, the kind that didn't advertise on billboards. When I brought it downstairs, Mom took it from my hands with a speed that surprised me. "What is this place?" I asked. "Did you work there?" "It is a closed chapter," she said, locking the folder in a drawer usually reserved for birth certificates. "When the day comes that you truly need it, I will tell you, but not yet." I went home that night feeling unsettled, as if the floorboards of my life were shifting. But the clarity came 2 nights later. It was 3 in the morning. I had woken up thirsty and walked down the hallway to the kitchen. The door to Gavin's home office was cracked open a sliver, spilling a line of yellow light across the dark floor. I heard his voice, low and confident. "Don't worry, Mom handled it," he was saying into his phone, laughing softly. "She is not going to do anything. She is too scared to leave. Besides, Evelyn has no backing. She is a nobody from nowhere." I stood in the dark hallway, the cold glass of water pressing against my palm. He sounded so sure of himself. He sounded like a man who had checked every exit and found them all blocked. I did not barge in. I did not scream. I just smiled in the darkness. It was a cold, terrifying smile. He thought I was alone. He thought my history ended at the borders of Briar Hollow. He had no idea that the nobody he was mocking was the daughter of a woman who kept secrets in a locked drawer, and that my backing was not a network of socialites, but something much more dangerous. I stopped looking at the marketing slides and the deleted calendar invites. Those were just symptoms of the disease. I went straight for the heart of the beast, the financials. Using an old administrative login that the IT department had forgotten to revoke, I tunneled into the deepest servers of Roe and Red. What I found was not a thriving empire, but a patient on life support. The company was bleeding cash, sustaining itself almost entirely on a massive revolving credit facility from a private institution called Stone Harbor Bank. The amount was staggering. It was $50 million, and it was nearly maxed out. But that was not the strange part. Companies have debt. That is normal business. The anomaly was the behavior of the lender. I scrolled through the loan history. Every time Roe and Red missed a quarterly target, which was often, the bank did not penalize them. Instead, there was a simple notation: extension granted. It happened again and again, month after month. It was as if someone at the bank was holding the power switch, waiting for the perfect moment to flip it. I dug deeper into the accounts payable. I found a series of monthly wire transfers labeled vaguely as executive consulting fees. They were for $300,000 each, sent to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The authorizing signature at the bottom of every transfer order was not the CFO's. It was Diane's. She was draining the company she claimed to protect, siphoning liquidity while preaching about sacrifice. Then came the mistake. It was a digital slip, the kind that ends dynasties. The CFO, a nervous man named Arthur who was terrified of Diane, forwarded an email chain to the executive team. He forgot to scrub the hidden distribution list, and he forgot that my personal email was still tagged as a backup for the strategy department. The subject line was audit prep, but the body of the email from Diane was explicit. Arthur, scrub the liability column, and whatever you do, do not let Evelyn touch the covenant table. She reads too much. My heart hammered against my ribs. I immediately pulled up the master loan agreement and searched for the covenants. I found what she was terrified of on page 42. It was the acceleration clause. The terms were brutal. Stone Harbor Bank reserved the right to demand immediate repayment of the entire $50 million if the borrower committed accounting fraud or, and this was the line that made me smile, if the borrower or its principals engage in public conduct that causes material reputational damage to the firm at a shareholder event. I leaned back in my chair. Diane did not just hate me, she was terrified of me. She knew that if I read that clause, I would understand that her entire lifestyle was hanging by a single thread, and she was handing me the scissors. 2 days later, Gavin walked into our bedroom carrying a thick manila envelope. He looked tired, but he wore that practiced mask of concern. "Evelyn," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "Mom and I have been talking. We know this transition has been hard for you. We want to make sure you are secure." He slid the papers toward me. It was a non-disclosure agreement, paired with a settlement contract. "It is a post-nuptial adjustment," he explained, his voice smooth. "It gives you a lump sum of $500,000. In exchange, you agree to step down from all company duties and refrain from discussing family business with anyone. It is just to protect the family legacy." I looked at the number. $500,000 to buy my silence while his mother stole millions. I need time to read it. I lied. "Don't take too long," Gavin said, his patience thinning. "The board is getting restless." As soon as he left the room, I did not sign it. I carried the document to my scanner. I scanned every page of the loan agreement, the shell company transfers, Diane's incriminating email, and the insultingly low hush money contract. I encrypted the file and uploaded it to a secure server that had only 2 access keys. One was mine, and one belonged to a woman in Briar Hollow who knew a thing or two about debt. I picked up my phone and typed a message to my mother. If I say, "Red light, can you hit the switch?" Her reply came back in 30 seconds. "The switch has been waiting for 20 years. Sloane Kincaid was no longer just a rumor kept in hotel rooms or late-night text messages. She began to occupy physical space in my world, and she did it with terrifying confidence. On a Tuesday morning, I walked into the branding conference room to find her sitting in my usual chair, holding a laser pointer and critiquing a slide deck I had built from scratch. "I think the tone here is a bit dated," Sloane said, looking at me with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Gavin needs something fresh, something explosive." I turned to Diane, expecting her to enforce protocol. Instead, my mother-in-law patted Sloane's hand. "Sloane has a wonderful instinct for the modern market," Diane said, her voice smooth as silk. "And Evelyn, you look exhausted. We discussed this. You need to rest. Sloane will handle the external relations for Gavin. It is better if you focus on getting better, as if my competence were a sickness. The psychological siege escalated the next day. A link to a popular industry gossip blog started circulating through the office Slack channels before being hastily deleted by HR. It was a blind item, but the description was surgical. Which heir to a logistics empire is being held back by a controlling, credit-stealing wife who is mentally unfit for leadership? I sat in my office, staring at the screen, feeling the walls close in. The article cited internal sources who claimed I was erratic and demanding. It was a character assassination designed to make my removal look like a mercy killing. When I confronted Gavin in the hallway, he refused to look me in the eye. He was checking his watch, his body language screaming that he wanted to be anywhere else. "Did you authorize this?" I asked, holding up my phone. "Evelyn, stop," he snapped, keeping his voice low. "You are being paranoid. But honestly, look at you. You are tense. You are unstable. The investors are hearing rumors about your temper. For God's sake, do not make a big deal out of this. Just lay low." He looked at me not as the woman he had promised to love, but as a PR crisis he had to manage. He was not protecting me. He was containing me. The final blow came when I checked the master schedule for the upcoming quarterly gala. The main event was listed as Strategic Vision Presentation. For the last 3 years, the attendees listed next to that item had always been Gavin Rowe and Evelyn Harper. I refreshed the page. The names had changed. Gavin Rowe and Sloane Kincaid. I was not just demoted, I was deleted. I went to the break room to get water, my hands shaking with a cold rage. Sarah, a junior associate who I had hired fresh out of college, pretended to stir her coffee next to me. She didn't look up, but her voice was a frantic whisper. "Evelyn, you need to be careful," she hissed. "I heard Diane talking to the legal team. She wants you out of the building before the independent audit committee arrives next month. She said you are a liability to the narrative." Everything snapped into focus. The party wasn't just a celebration for them. It was a public dismissal. They were going to parade Sloane as the new face of the company and paint me as the sick, incapable wife who had been gently put out to pasture. They wanted to humiliate me so thoroughly that no one would believe a word I said when the financial house of cards eventually fell. I went back to my desk. I did not cry. I did not send an angry email. I opened the encrypted folder on my private server. I had to be ready. I went home and selected my dress for the gala. I chose a deep navy gown, simple and unadorned. It was the kind of dress designed to blend into the background, to make the wearer invisible. That was exactly what I wanted. I needed them to think I had accepted my defeat. I needed them to think I was harmless. I picked up my phone to make one last call to Briar Hollow, just to confirm the timeline. But I stopped. The plan was already in motion. Instead, I renamed the master file containing 5 years of fraud, the predatory loan documents, and Diane's emails. I typed the new name slowly. The truth does not need to scream, it just needs receipts. My name is Evelyn Harper, and 48 hours before the doors of the Grand Hotel opened, I made my first move on the chessboard. It was quiet and seemingly bureaucratic. I sent an email to the Human Resources Director, blind copying my personal external address. I asked for a simple confirmation of my role as the lead strategist on the Project Hush merger and the detailed breakdown of my billable hours for the last fiscal year. I knew they would not reply. I knew Diane had already ordered my file to be sanitized, but I did not send it to get an answer. I sent it to create a timestamp. I needed proof that I had reached out through proper channels before the chaos began. Later that afternoon, I intercepted Arthur, the chief financial officer, in the break room. He was staring at the coffee machine as if it were a bomb. I closed the door behind me and locked it. "Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low and devoid of threat. "I have one question. If Stone Harbor Bank decides to call the credit line, how long does the company survive?" Arthur dropped his plastic stirrer. He turned to me. his face the color of old ash. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. Evelyn, why would you ask that? The bank is happy. Diane says we are secure. The truth. Arthur, I pressed. If the cash tap turns off? How long? He looked at the door, then back at me. 2 weeks. Maybe 10 days if payroll hits on a Friday. 2 weeks. That was the reality behind the champagne and the press releases. Diane was not running a business. She was running a confidence scheme held together by duct tape and fear. She was leveraging tomorrow's debt to pay for today's appearance of wealth. One tug on the thread, and the entire tapestry would unravel. That evening, Gavin came home early. He did not kiss me. He did not ask about my day. He placed a thick document on the kitchen island. It was titled Amicable Separation and Asset Dissolution Agreement. It is better this way, Gavin said, refusing to look at me. Sign this, and you get to keep the apartment in the city. You get a monthly stipend for 2 years, but you have to resign from the board effective immediately, and you have to sign the non-disclosure regarding all family operations. I picked up the paper. It was not a separation agreement. It was a gag order. It was a bribe to leave quietly so Sloan could take my seat without anyone asking questions. Who drafted this? Gavin, I asked. Legal, he muttered. No, I said, stepping into his personal space until he was forced to look at me. Who told you to give this to me tonight? Was it your idea to divorce your wife 2 days before the biggest night of the year? Or was it an order? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a lost child wearing a man's suit. It is complicated. Evelyn, just sign it, please. Before Mom, before it gets worse. I did not sign it. I left it on the counter and walked away. That night, the house was silent, suffocating under the weight of the secrets in the walls. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and dialed the number for Briar Hollow. Me, I whispered when she picked up. I need to know. Are you sure Mara's voice was steady, anchoring me in the storm? The question is not if I am sure. The question is, are you? Once we do this. Evelyn, there is no going back to that dinner table. I do not want to destroy innocent people, I said, my hand gripping the phone tight. There are employees, regular people who need their paychecks. I just want to end her. I want to break the power she uses to hurt people. Then you will get exactly that, my mother replied. But for the debt to be called, for the clause to be triggered, the breach of ethics must be public. You cannot hide this in a boardroom. You have to let them expose themselves. You have to let them show the world exactly who they are. I understand. I said, good. She said, sleep well. My daughter. I hung up. I did not sleep well, but I slept with purpose. When I woke up on the morning of the party, I did not choose the red dress that screamed for attention. I chose the navy one. I put on the diamond studs Gavin had given me when he still looked at me with love. I was not going to the Grand Hotel to scream. I was not going to cry or throw a drink in Sloane's face. I was going to walk into that room and let the system do exactly what it was designed to do. Revenge is not about emotion. It is about audits. The ballroom was suffocating, filled with the scent of expensive lilies and the heavier, cloying smell of old money protecting its own. The lights dimmed, focusing a single, harsh spotlight on the stage where Diane Rowe stood. She looked impeccable in emerald silk, gripping the microphone like a scepter. She did not look like a woman whose company was running on fumes. She looked like a queen addressing her subjects. Family, Diane began, her voice trembling with a practiced theatrical emotion. It is the bedrock of Rowe and Red. And in this family, we value sacrifice. We value those who understand that true power is quiet. Lately, we have had to deal with unfortunate distractions, ambitions that were misplaced. Ungrateful hearts that did not understand their lucky station in life. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Every head in the room turned slightly, 100 pairs of eyes sliding over me like oil. I stood near the back, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. She was rewriting history in real time, painting me as the grasping, unstable outsider who had bitten the hand that fed her. Then, she handed the microphone to Gavin. My husband stepped into the light. He looked handsome, the golden boy of the industry, but I saw the sheen of sweat on his forehead. He beckoned Sloane to join him. She walked up the steps, the diamonds I had earned glittering around her neck. "Tonight is about the future," Gavin said, his voice booming through the speakers, "and the future requires partners who are aligned, who are strong. I want to propose a toast to the woman who has been my rock through this difficult quarter, to Sloane, my true partner." The room erupted in applause. It was a seal of approval. He was publicly replacing me, not just as a wife, but as the architect of his success. He was flaunting his breach of our marriage contract as a corporate victory. I felt a hand on my elbow. It was not gentle. I turned to see the head of private security, a man named Henderson who had driven me to the airport a dozen times. His face was grim. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice low but hard as granite. "Mrs. Rowe feels that this environment is too stimulating for you right now. She has asked that we escort you to the private lounge, for your own health." "Ma'am, it was not a request. It was an eviction. They were removing the evidence of their betrayal so the party could continue without a guilty conscience." I did not pull away. I straightened my spine. "I can walk myself. Henderson, please, just come with us quietly," he insisted, tightening his grip slightly. Before I turned, I looked at Gavin one last time. He was raising his glass, smiling at a major investor. He felt my gaze. I know he did because his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. But he did not look at me. He turned his back, shielding himself with Sloane's silver dress. That was the moment the last thread snapped. There was no love left, no nostalgia, no hope for an apology. There was only the cold clarity of a contract violated. I walked out of the ballroom, flanked by security, moving from the warmth of the party into the cool, marble silence of the corridor. The doors swung shut behind me, muffling the applause until it sounded like distant thunder. "You can wait in here," Henderson said, pointing to a small waiting room. "Thank you," I said, as soon as he stepped back to stand guard. I walked further down the hall, near the grand staircase where the acoustics were sharpest. I could still hear the laughter from inside. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. I pulled my phone from my purse. My thumb hovered over the contact labeled Mom. I took a breath, exhaling the last of my hesitation. I pressed call. "Red light," I said. The answer came instantly. There was no sleep in Mara Harper's voice, only the sharp, metallic click of readiness. "Where are you?" she asked. "Are there cameras?" I looked up. The hotel's security feed was blinking in the corner, and through the glass doors of the ballroom, I could see the live feed of the event being projected onto the massive screens for the overflow crowd. "Yes," I said, watching the light on the camera above me. "Everywhere. The whole world is watching." "Good," my mother said, and I could hear the sound of a key turning in a lock on her end. "Then let them see. Let them see the price of turning the truth into entertainment. The sound of an empire collapsing is not a crash. It is a synchronized chime. It started in the pocket of Arthur, the CFO. He was raising a glass of champagne to his lips when his phone vibrated against his hip. He pulled it out, annoyed at the interruption. But as his eyes scanned the screen, the color drained from his face so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. But nobody looked at the mess, because a second later, the general counsel's phone buzzed. then the phone of the lead investor, then the phone of the vice president of operations. It was a domino effect of digital panic. Arthur looked up at the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He turned to the man beside him and whispered, his voice cracking. They called it. Stone Harbor just froze the line. The $50 million facility is locked. The whispers spread like wildfire in dry grass. A logistics partner near the front checked his email and cursed loudly. I just got a cancellation notice on the fleet contract, he shouted, no longer caring about decorum. They are citing liquidity risk. Diane, what is going on? On stage, Diane Rowe froze. She was mid-sentence, praising the stability of the family trust, but the air had been sucked out of the room. She tried to smile, but her facial muscles spasmed. Her hand, gripping the microphone, began to shake so violently that the jewelry on her wrist rattled against the metal stand. Please, Diane stammered, the feedback from the microphone screeching as she clutched it too tight. Everyone, please. It is just a technical glitch, a misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding, a supplier yelled from the back, holding up his tablet. Your accounts payable just auto-rejected our invoice for $80,000. It says insufficient funds. Gavin, who had been basking in the adoration of the crowd just moments ago, looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He scrambled off the stage, phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising in panic. This is Gavin Rowe. I demand to speak to the senior risk officer immediately. He screamed into the receiver. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, and his arrogance crumbled into terror. What do you mean you have documents? What documents? We never sent anything. The voice on the other end was loud enough for the people standing nearby to hear the cold, metallic response. We received verified proof of a covenant breach regarding the acceleration clause. The debt is due. Mr. Rowe, all of it. Sloane Kincaid, standing alone on the stage in her silver dress, looked down at her own phone, her face twisted in horror. A leaked email chain was circulating among the board members, an email chain that showed her signature on a consulting contract for a shell company that had received $300,000 for services that did not exist. I didn't know, Sloane whimpered, backing away as an investor glared at her. I just signed what Gavin gave me. I didn't know it was embezzlement. The room was now a chaotic sea of accusations. Mr. Sterling, the lead investor who had toasted Gavin 5 minutes ago, stood up and slammed his hand on the table. Who is controlling the risk here? He bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at Diane. Who has been draining the capital? We were told this company was solvent. The heavy double doors at the back of the room opened. They didn't bang open, they just swung wide, revealing the empty hallway. And there I stood. I did not enter the room. I stayed right on the threshold, framed by the darkness of the corridor, looking like the only person in the world who wasn't drowning. Diane saw me. Her eyes widened, realizing instantly that the ghost she thought she had banished was holding the remote control. She abandoned the microphone and marched to the edge of the stage, her voice a guttural growl that stripped away all her polish. You, Diane hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You ungrateful! What did you do? Did you ruin us? The room fell silent, waiting for my defense. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step into their mess. I just looked her dead in the eye. No, Diane, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. I just stopped covering for you. Diane opened her mouth to scream, but before she could make a sound, the massive LED screen behind her, the one meant to display the highlight reel of Gavin's achievements, flickered. The connection changed. The smiling photos of Gavin and Sloane vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, white document with a header that made the entire board of directors gasp. It was a live feed of a forensic accounting file. and nobody in that room understood who had connected the cable. The giant LED screen, which moments ago had been broadcasting a lie, flickered once and settled on a stark, terrifying image. It was a spreadsheet, but not the sanitized version the investors had seen in the quarterly report. The header read, in bold black letters, Row and Red True Cash Flow Statement. Below it was a live timestamp and a digital authentication seal that made the breath catch in Diane's throat. Quinridge Ledger and Trust. The double doors at the back of the room opened wide. My mother, Mara Harper, walked in. She was not wearing a ball gown. She was wearing a sharp, charcoal suit I had never seen her wear before. She didn't look like a small-town bookkeeper anymore. She looked like an auditor arriving at a crime scene. She walked through the parted crowd, holding a thin blue folder, and stopped at the base of the stage. "I am the holder of the legally assigned debt," Mara announced, her voice calm but projecting to every corner of the silent room. "And the acceleration clause has just been activated." Diane's face went from pale to ghostly white. She stared at my mother with dawning horror. She knew the name Quinridge. It was the private shadow fund that had quietly bailed out Row and Red from bankruptcy 10 years ago. She had always assumed it was run by faceless bankers in New York. She never imagined that the hand holding the leash of her entire legacy belonged to the mother of the bride she had spent 3 years humiliating. Mara didn't scream. She didn't lecture. She simply opened the folder and began to read the data, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. Item 1. Mara read, looking at the board of directors, consulting fees totaling $300,000 a month, paid to a Cayman Islands entity. Authorized by Diane Rowe. Item 2. Internal directives sent to Human Resources, instructing staff to strip Evelyn Harper of all strategic credits. Item 3. Falsified liquidity report sent to Stone Harbor Bank to secure fraudulent extensions. Gavin stepped forward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Wait, there is a misunderstanding. We can explain. Mara didn't even look at him. She just turned the page. No misunderstanding creates a system of monthly withdrawals. Gavin, that is not an error. That is theft." That was my cue. I walked from the doorway to the center of the room. I didn't rush. I took the microphone from the stand where Diane had abandoned it. I looked at the sea of faces, the investors who had doubted me, the colleagues who had shunned me, and the husband who had replaced me. "I do not ask anyone here to believe me," I said, my voice steady. "I only present what they tried to hide. The numbers do not lie. Only people do." Mara stepped up beside me. She looked at Diane, who was now trembling visibly. "Here are the conditions," Mara stated, addressing the terrified board members. "The company must file for restructuring within 24 hours. Diane Rowe is to be removed effectively immediately from all positions, stripped of all signature authority, and barred from physical access to the premises. If these terms are not met, the full debt will be called tonight, and Rowe and Red will be insolvent by sunrise." Diane looked around the room, her eyes wide and desperate. She reached out toward a longtime family friend, a wealthy investor named Mr. Sterling. "Please," Diane begged, her voice cracking. "We are family. You know us. Don't let them do this." But Mr. Sterling stepped back. Then the others stepped back. The circle around Diane and Gavin grew wider, as if their failure was a contagious disease. No one wanted to be standing next to the fraud when the authorities arrived. I looked at Gavin. He was slumped against the podium, staring at the floor. He finally understood. I hadn't made the call to destroy the company. I had made the call to stop them from gutting it and framing me for the wreckage. "I knew," I said to him, lowering the microphone just enough so it felt intimate, yet loud enough for the room to hear. "I knew about the loans. I knew about the shell company, and I knew you were going to use tonight to push me out so you could blame the collapse on my instability." I turned to Diane. She was leaning against the table, looking old and defeated. "You taught me to know my place," I said. delivering the final line that I had carried in my chest for 3 years. My place is in the truth. And your place, Diane, is outside the door. I placed the microphone on the table. It made a heavy thud, like a gavel closing a case. I took my mother's arm, and together, we walked out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos, the flashing cameras, and the ruined dynasty behind us. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.